So this week it's still the Road to Alpha 2 series, but it's slightly different. Now normally I cover guides and systems, whether it's caravans or PvP or professions, but I'm actually gonna follow the main story quest. Due to the nature of asset creation, you're probably wondering, how is it even possible to really have an MSQ with limited instances and kind of the way the world works? But without rambling on anymore, I'm just gonna jump right into it and get amongst all the information we have. Now the main narrative for Ashes of Creation is that players are descendants of the original inhabitants of Verra who had to leave due to something called the Fall, and the players are now returning to Verra. In Ashes of Creation, the main story is explored through narratives, or what you'd call meta stories, and these are done through story arcs, which was a system introduced in March livestream 2023. However, not every server will have the same narrative, as this is going to be because each server will develop differently due to the node system and the way that works in itself. So what are the story arcs? Well, the senior quest designer Scotty described story arcs as being like pre-packaged tabletop design. They contain both NPCs, quests and monsters and are not procedurally generated. The dialogue and narrative beats have all been written by a design team to create an engaging story.
It's helpful, I think, to think about story arcs as kind of like a pre-packaged tabletop campaign. They contain like all of the NPCs and quests and monsters, like all the things you need to make a cool fantasy story. They're not procedurally generated. We author them, we write all the dialogue, and we construct all the narrative beats and everything like that. But they will enter the world dynamically depending on the state that the world is currently in, how players have built up specific nodes, like what races control various nodes. We have plans to include lots of different things on top of that. But yeah, it's we don't have any quest hubs or anything like that in this game because players build up all the cities. So we had to get a system that kind of looks at what players are doing and can inject content into the world that makes sense for what they're doing.
Now, how story arcs enter the world is dynamic, though it is affected by several factors. Obviously, the main factors will be node progression, regional activity, cultural activity, and personal class-based activity. Some certain story arcs can be unlocked through the bulletin board system. However, to unlock these, there would need to be some other requirements met to be able to access the story arcs, and this is going to include stuff like maze requiring certain resources, certain buildings being built within a node, certain tasks have been completed by social organisations. Do bear in mind though, if there's too many major story arcs active within the same time and same zone, another story arc will not be able to become active in that zone, and we'll have to wait for the current story arcs to finish and the history of a significant narrative events, including when they first happened and who participated in them, will be canonised in a library. And to dip a little into how DLCs are going to work, well, when future expansions and DLCs become available, the developers have said they want to ensure that the story arcs in those expansions will continue on from existing story arcs. There will be content for every type of player due to the story arcs all having different cooldowns and different scales, and some story arcs we've seen so far are in the past. There's stuff like the Ancient Violence, Dead Trees and Ghost Leaves, Harrow and Moon, Relic of War, The Blood Still Due, The Enemy Within, The Minotaurs and The Pilgrim's Problem. We also had the Priestess and the Piper, so already pre-Alpha 2 we've seen quite a few story arcs that we should be able to test when Alpha 2 becomes available in hopefully Q3 this year if there's no issues or delays. So how do the story arc chapters and quests actually work? Well, story arcs can have several chapters within them and also can be referred to as phases of a story arc, and they can affect several things across servers, including environments as we've seen during the Carthan story arc.
There it goes.
Uh-oh. Oh, things are getting red. The complete What is that?
The blood?
Oh, the blood still due?
There it is. It's paying right now.
Oh my gosh.
Monsters, NPCs, quests, and actual pathways throughout the world. But to progress through a chapter, the player must complete the quests within that chapter called the story arc quests. They are both required and optional objectives during these quests, and depending on what objectives are completed will affect the outcome, and some objectives may even be hidden when you first accept the quest. Story arc chapters have timers on how long they will last, which is indicated by real world time, and if a player completes the objectives before the chapter timer is done, they will have to wait till the timer runs out for the next chapter to get further quests in that story arc. And when it comes to story arcs as well, they can last for multiple days and most will repeat on a cooldown. However, for major story arcs, they will only occur for one time. They will be replayable, however, due to the major story arcs affecting the world when played in its replayable state, the choices made will not impact the world as they did the first time when the story arc was played.
This is one thing people might be curious about. I mentioned how you could do what you needed to do as long as the phase, you can do any quests available in that phase while that phase is available. So what happens if you miss something? You go on vacation or whatever, and you can't log in during the week to participate in the quests that are going on in the phase for that story arc. For most story arcs, they do repeat after they complete. They'll go on a cooldown and they will repeat again. You'll have another opportunity to get involved with them the next time they come through. For our big major world-spanning story arcs that will sort of tell your server's your server's own story, those ones don't repeat. Those are sort of one and done. But you can replay them. There's a different system for replaying previous phases for the big main story arcs. However, decisions and objectives you make in those won't count toward your server's what's canonized for your server, which is our way of saying what decisions they make for the objective.
Some events and materials will only be playable and gatherable due to specific story arcs. An example of this was the corrupt resource we saw in the Carthan story arc preview, which were also going to be available in the corrupt areas during certain story arcs. Do bear in mind some stages of the quest and the whole story arc chapters can fail depending on the node progression. You may be able to retry these failed quests and chapters. The quests available in a story arc can also be affected by nearby nodes, seasonal influences like the weather and other things, and events such as world bosses, alliances and relationship between nodes. This can unlock citizens from multiple nodes being unlocked. So what are the rewards for this? So obviously you'll get XP and currency for completing the story arcs. However, story arcs will not be the best source for this. They're going to provide you with gear, however it's not going to be the best in slot gear. This is gained by doing raids and crafting. Intrepid says they are balancing the story arc rewards to avoid there being a meta of which nodes are built up to activate a certain story arc, as they want every server to build up and be different, and if there was a meta storyline, every server would be the same, which kind of defeats the point of this dynamic play driven world that we have control of and that we can shape, and I do think that's a fairly decent thing they've done. But what I would say is I still think there should be a definite solid MSQ where you can kind of play through, and it does have maybe some in-game cinematics, because I know they don't want to allocate a load of funds to mad cinematics like Blizzard did, but at the same time this is a niche game, and I do think we want to cater to some of the PvE guys. We know it's PvX, but to run a guild or play this game without PvEs, you pretty much can't do it without PvEing yourself, and I do think even with the PvP we can hold on to some of the more PvE guys and they can be utilized quite well within guilds and within communities, but you do need to keep them there. So obviously you've got the way the professions work, the artisans, life skill and whatever you want to call it, but it would be nice for them to have this decent MSQ, not just with lore, with actual story, and maybe add in some in-engine trailers, like they've done before, to kind of spice it up a bit, to kind of add a bit more. And they could do that for the trailers, and even for the launch of trailers and DLCs down the line or new patches, they could maybe knock up a fairly decent decent cinematic in UE5. It's really not that difficult to do, even for like semi-professional people with a small team, and Intrepid I do think could do something like this. That's my opinion though, and that's my feedback. Now obviously it's not violent if they don't do this, it doesn't really matter, but I'm always thinking about how they can develop this game long term, and as they progress through Alpha 2 and do stuff, how they can bring in more people and show different aspects of the game to kind of cater to such a bigger audience. Now I'm not saying go PvE, I'm not saying take the loot drops out or any of this shit, I'm just trying to give the feedback that I think best fits the overall community and how we can make this game be viable for more and more players without taking away the systems and the way the world works in a negative way, or kind of babying the systems and turning it into, you know, something that it was never meant to be, just like how New Worlds and many of MMOs have backpedaled on the initial designs, and the ethos of what they wanted to do inevitably ends in a fucking disaster. That's my personal opinion. Hopefully that's coming across right. Overall, I think the way they're doing MSQ is fairly solid. I think as it develops with DLCs and patches, it's going to be an insane story, and it's also going to be very unique in each server, so we never know what we're going to do. It's also going to make people want to go to war and fight to destroy certain nodes and open up certain areas so we can actually access more of this story, and some of the resources being hid behind story or quest lines and certain things in the world. That shit's insane, and I think this is how you get the replayability. And there's enough beef where people want to fight each other, fighting not just for PvP but for the PvE elements of the story that lead to better resources or rarer resources for gears, sets and all this other shit. Yeah, I think they've kind of done really well with it. Let me know what you think, or your feedback or your thoughts are in the comment section below. Drop a like on the video, feel free to give it a share, and if you haven't subscribed already, hit the subscribe button, turn the notifications on. I've got a lot more content coming and guides in the Road to Alpha 2 series, and as always I really do appreciate you watching the video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.